Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, I'm very glad to be here today for the breakfast. And it just seems like just a couple of years ago when I was here with Tom and just had a wonderful time. And so when Charlotte called me, there was absolutely no interface between my thoughts and my response. I told her I would be there because I love Pennsylvania. I love the philosophy of the Republican Party. And for those of you who know me, I'm very disciplined. I don't care what the circumstances. I'll die to support the Constitution of this great nation that was born where we sit today. And really, I'm speaking for you because that's what made America the great nation it is. And before I say more, I want us to bow our heads and pray for our brother, Brian Allen, the commissioner of Perry County, who was hospitalized at the University of Pittsburgh. I've actually been with Brian. I referred him to one of my former classmates at the Cleveland Clinic for his kidney problems, and then he wound up in Pittsburgh for kidney transplantation, and then was going through the evaluation, and I'll call him frequently and motivate him. Unfortunately, other medical issues popped up, and as I speak, he's not in good shape. And so I will be stopping by after this to harass him, and because I love him, he's a great man. So just bow our heads for a second. Thank you. And I'm very glad to be here today. And first, I want to thank all our representatives who are here today, and everybody, and time doesn't permit me to go down the list, but in particular I'd like to mention my brother, Senator Doc in the corner, and Mastriani. I haven't seen him, and his lovely wife, and it's been a while. And Dave, actually, Dr. McCormick, and now I've referred to him as Dr. McCormick before, and people go, what's that? Well, Dave actually, just like Doc, these are highly educated men, and when you run for office, people forget that, and also the significance of that, because we're talking about American leadership at the highest level of excellence. So we got to support Dave. We got to send him to Washington, D.C. It's not an option, No human is perfect. I'm probably the most imperfect one, so I'm qualified to speak on that regard because of my imperfections. And but the country needs people like him, and congratulations. And I believe Representative Torin and Dan are here today, and I'd like to say hello to you. What have I been doing? Just really brief. When I left the campaign trail, and that wasn't it. I'll continue to fight. And some of the things, one of the things that she mentioned, you probably saw in front page New York newspaper time last year or so, actually 2023, June 2nd, why this surgeon helped defeat unfair DEI at top medical schools. Well, Kenny Zhu, you heard on CNN National News that a gentleman who was president of a group called United, a unity group, who was fighting unfair practices of DEI. DEI is a very terrible acronym. And I got a phone call from him because I'd spoken so much about this. And first I thought it was some liberal trying to, rope me in, and it was Kenny. And he says, we got a problem. The Supreme Court is ready to make a decision, and maybe in a year or so, in 6 months, and medical school has very powerful implications, and you're a surgeon, you're a doctor. Would this be something you'd be willing to do? And before he finished the sentence, I said, yes, where do we meet? He says, North Durham, North Carolina. He says, can you come and speak? We're assembling, there'll be a bunch of liberals, Democrats, and real Americans, and I'm not going to say who they are. I see a bunch of them sitting here today. But he says, this may be good or may be bad. I says, well, as a surgeon, I never turned down a challenge. So I got on the plane and I went, and the place was packed, and really, I laid it out objectively. If you walk into the operating room, you want to meet the DEI surgeon, or do you want to meet the most qualified person who's going to wield the scalpel? And I have to say, at the end, I actually didn't need any security. I walked to my car and drove home, and I had a lot, if you Google it, positive response even from extreme psychotic liberals. And they realized this is a poison in the American blood we need to get rid of. And next thing I know, I got a call from a newspaper, and you know, I mean, it didn't end from that lecture. I spent days and weeks and several months traveling around lecturing against this nonsense. I came to America with $20, 14 years old, barely had pubic hair. Now, I'm sorry, I'm talking like a doctor, so I don't want to get anybody. And because of the greatness of this nation, you work hard, you know, the nation rewards you. And what I've seen terrible happening here, which is a symptom of a greater malady, is that our children are being taught otherwise. That's how you destroy a nation. So if I didn't speak out, even at the risk of my own life, I've betrayed the trust and confidence that society gives all of us. And because I've not been an advocate for our children, nothing you do in your life matters if you're not an advocate for the kids. And so when the decision was passed down last year, including the unfair practices of my own alma mater in Boston, I was pleased, because some may not like me, but I think ultimately if we all fight together, as Senator was talking about being pro-life, eventually the beneficiaries are not us, they're the future generation. And so that's what I've been doing. And then well, the other thing is, as a doctor, we went through the crisis of the COVID, where everybody was pushing jabs and shots and this, that, and the other. And nobody was thinking about preventive systems in our own bodies. And I talked a lot about that during the campaign. So I decided to do something about it. I started a new company, Miami Max Life. If you see a flyer on your table, and it's the fastest selling currently supplement company in the country. And why is that? People are calling up and going, well, what do you have in this stuff? No, pure nutritional supplements. We have something for your immune system to boost it. The hospitals told us, no, encourage your patients to get shots instead. And so we've come up with something that is truly effective and truly pure. It's an industry that's not regulated. And we set out to change and transform that. And a lot of our customers too included some of the same people who promoted the shots. But in the privacy of their homes, they realized I need to be taking this for myself. So that's what I've been doing. And as you know, my passion has been orphans, and all the revenue for this is targeted to support child orphan education. And the schools that I've built overseas and in poor communities, I've spent the past couple of years at least working to support them, and the kids are doing great. So my life has been busy. I'm glad to be here today. And so I'd like to thank Charlotte for this invitation to come here and fellowship with you. And I thank you for your esteemed leadership. She's a wonderful person. Let's give her a round of applause. So I have a couple of words to share with you here when I have everything organized, so I don't ramble. We know that throughout history, human beings have longed for great leadership, and Dave mentioned that a few minutes ago. And countless scholars have actually debated what constitutes great leadership. And this is so important and pivotal, especially the crossroads where we find ourselves right now in history. And at the end of the day, a great leader is one who recognizes that great leadership is not a popularity contest. And And if you listen to what Senator Mastriani mentioned earlier in regard to some of the other actors that are currently in leadership, you can understand what it means. So it's not a popularity contest, but it's a call to serve at the highest level of excellence. Listen to my words and vis-a-vis who we have in the White House now, or who we have in Harrisburg. True leadership inspires. It does not conspire. Just remember what he said earlier. True leadership makes decisions that are people-centered. A lot of you can't even afford to pay for energy in Pennsylvania, yet we have so much energy beneath us. And even the European leaders who got together 2 years ago in a summit in the UK, and they decided that all cars were going to go electric in a few years. Clean energy, this, that, and the other. And within a few months, the realities hit them. And Germany started to backpedal. And England started to backpedal. That's not true leadership. It's not making decisions that are people-centered. And true leadership talks about somebody who inspires others, inspires people enough so that they can drop their nets and follow you. Does that remind you of somebody you read about, an itinerant carpenter in the Bible? That's real leadership. And most importantly, every true leader should ask themselves that one question: how will this decision affect the future of our children? It's simple. If you can ask yourself that question in all honesty, you begin to make the right decisions every day. You don't have to have fancy degrees and this, that, and the other. It's having somebody who makes decisions that are people-centered. Well, let's come back to one of the most vilified Americans we know of. He acknowledged years ago that our allies weren't paying their fair share in protecting their own countries. So he vocally, not diplomatically, told them, you got to step up and do it. All of us sitting here, our tax money was supporting dozens of countries in Europe and many other parts of the world. And I keep going back to Doc because during the campaign I learned about his service, and many of you here, Germany included. And guess what? They acquiesced because he was right. Yet his own people vilified him for doing this. He reversed a policy on Cuba that in many ways had encouraged the dictators there and taken away freedoms from the Cuban people. Yet the malicious, psychotic liberal media labeled him a pariah. Of note is that his successor has upheld those policies despite. When he cried out for a wall to address our leaky borders and talked with passion about the impact of illegal immigration to our women, our children, right here in Adams County, Elk County, Erie, and in counties across America, what did they say about him? They labeled him a bad person. When he imposed massive tariffs on China and Chinese products because of decades-old trade imbalances and strategies that hurt Americans, hurt American economy. What did they say? He was ignorant and a threat to global commerce. Yet his successor has upheld those policies. Never got any credit for it. And you need to know this as we're moving down to November. He led the charge to allocate historic funding and support for vocational education in America. One thing we're missing: not every child needs to go to college, going through the classic educational pathway of high school, college, university. No, we need plumbers, electricians, we need builders. He recognized that. And he provided increasing funding for STEM programs to address deficiencies in the minority and the female communities. And a robust funding to support school choice in a bid to address the educational gaps between poor people or minorities, and to build the economy because he understood the importance of educational excellence in any global economy and to establish or re-establish Americans' leadership and dominance. He was labeled ignorant. And he led the charge to revamp an unjust or unfair criminal justice system for certain segments of our communities or our country, to address injustices to the poor in America, across the states. And in a bid to end decades-long policies that kept many in a state of chronic social dependency. And he set off to promote policies to empower those living in the outskirts of hope in America. And he understood that no affirmative action exists in global commerce. You got to be able to compete in global commerce. You got to have the right tickets. And that on any day, excellence trumps, and no pun intended, diversity. He expanded loans for black business owners and facilitated about $4 billion in contracts each year to minority-owned manufacturing firms. And he made a permanent commitment of more than $250 million to support historically black colleges and universities. Barack Obama didn't do that. So, why am I saying these things? You need to know them, because this year you need to know them. And just like with the DEI, most of my audience was not like-minded Republicans. But there are a lot of people right there in the border wanting to join us. But they don't know the facts. We need to know the facts to spread the gospel and rally them in. In 1999, I'm just going to share this with you. A gentleman, you may have heard his name, representing the liberal side, Jesse Jackson, in a speech praised Donald Trump for his lifetime of helping and supporting minority communities. But whimsical liberals label him now racist. He just wouldn't understand how many times I've been called racist since I've been doing all these things. And when they call you racist, you know you're really doing a good job. Yet, a plantation overseer, whose name you may have heard of, when he was asked on a radio interview why somebody should vote for him as opposed to Donald Trump, and he used an expression, "You ain't black." Now, some of you remember that, right? Yeah. That's the President of the United States. You take that one sentence, you give it to anybody to dissect it and see the implication of it. And I use this example in North Carolina. It's much more difficult or easier to fool people than to convince them that they've been fooled. And what we need is importunity. Keep on keeping on. His honesty has earned him an unjustified label of unpatriotic, believe it or not. Now, I'll tell you something. He was labeled unfit to be president. Right? Let me take you back to the current administration. Are you happy with a skyrocketing standard of cost of living that Dave was talking about? Are you happy with the countless mass murders? Are you happy with our children who can't eat 3 square meals a day, yet we're spending billions on illegal immigrants? I said billions. Now, some people are wising up because people in Chicago and maybe Philadelphia and some other places, New York, are saying, hey, wait a minute. We're Americans. We've been working. We've been paying taxes. We've been doing all this. And all of a sudden, these guys come streaming across the border, and you're giving each one of them a cell phone and, you know, a checkbook, a blank check. This year is a crucial year. We've got the opportunity. We've got all the ingredients here. Let's not miss out on this opportunity. We're taking perfectly normal children and turning them into lifelong patients. Think about that. Because of our crazy gender policies. one of the most common causes of death among our children is suicide. If you were to draw this as a statistician, and since I'm facing you, I'll start here, the curve starts here and it goes up. Kids weren't killing themselves years ago. What has happened? It's not the food. It's the leadership. Are you happy with the Supreme Court Justice of the United States of America, a country that with $20 I loved and was a dream that Peace Corps volunteer says, you go to America, you'll be successful because you work hard. America, which was the beacon light of hope for the world. And a Supreme Court Justice, think about that position. There's nothing more pathetic in life than to occupy a position you do not deserve or you're not qualified for. Cannot define what it means to be a woman. What is easier in the world? Just sit back and think when you talk about our countries being destroyed, and think about the implication of someone sitting on that seat as a Supreme Court Justice. 2024, my brothers and sisters, it's a critical year in our history. We're the architects of that history. Let's not let go of that opportunity. And we have a real possibility on the international realm, and maybe Dave should have touched on this, that the dollar will lose its prominence as a standard for global commerce because of the type of leadership that we have here. You want a third world war? That's what's going to happen. America has fallen so far behind in science and technology, let me tell you, that China has overtaken America as the leading global contributor in scientific research publications. You may not know that, but the measure of the level of science and technology in any nation is correlated with the amount of literature, research that comes out of that country. America has dominated for decades, and just in the past couple of years, China has overtaken us. You open any journal, even the journals of medicine, I don't see the articles coming from here. I've never once heard a clarion call, a cry, because you know what that means? We are falling so fast that we don't even realize we are till we crash. My brothers and sisters, there's a famous historian during the Athenian age, Thucydides. You probably heard of him. He wrote a book about the Peloponnesian Wars. And I read that book, and one thing that really stood out in one of the passages was that coming events cast their shadow. There's a huge shadow that's cast across swaths of this great land, but we're not paying attention. And allow me to mention a couple of anecdotes, and this is particularly important for me as a physician, and you'll understand why. Joe Biden, during a campaign stop a couple years ago, mentioned his experience at the G7 2022 meeting, and he alluded to having had a chat with Hermit Kohl. This is 2022. And in a separate event, he mentioned having had a chat with Francois Mitterrand, as you know, Prime Minister of France. The problem is that Francois Mitterrand died many years ago, 1996, and Kohl died in 2017. I happen to have been one of Kohl's doctors for years. So I'm familiar with him. And coincidentally, and the reason I mention these two is that when I was a Harvard exchange scholar in France years ago, we took care of Francois Mitterrand's wife, somebody that I knew. But if the President of the United States in 2022 is mentioning an event concerning individuals he met who are already dead, this is the United States of America. What type of standards are we setting for leadership? And many of you know that during the 2022 State of the Union address, he kept referring to Ukraine as what? Iran. Now, are there any nurses in here? Yeah. Well, what goes first in dementia and cognitive decline? Recent memory. And if you're not worried, and if you're not out voting in 2024 to change this trajectory we're on, well, there's a constitutional line that tells us that if something happens to the President of the United States, who's the next president? I'm not going to pivot this speech to talk about a vice president. That's who you will get. So the consequences of us not doing anything or doing the right thing are pretty grave and profound. And I've observed changes in Biden as a physician, and she can attest to this over the past few years, that I'll take a couple of hours just delineating them to you. He's unfit for office. Today, we've convened on hallowed grounds in Gettysburg. Many valiant men and women sacrificed their lives so we could all sit here today. They're very upset because of the way things are going in a country, a great nation that's on the brink of collapse. And we are the beneficiaries who have conspired to destroy that nation. All of us. The constitutional foundations laid out by our predecessors and the values which our forebears built to make this nation great. President Lincoln, many of his predecessors and successors understood the importance of true leadership because it comes with a fiduciary responsibility to guarantee that successive generations would be trustees and curators and would continue to uphold the noble ideals and protect and preserve the sacred helm that we call the United States of America. We have that responsibility. We're on a dangerous trajectory. America is at war. And as I come to my conclusion, I'd like to share an extract from Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And for many of you who have read it, you understand it's very short, but it's very powerful and meaningful. And that meaning translates across the ages. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We're met on a great battlefield of that war. Think about that. We're actually on that battlefield right now, and our actions will determine the destiny of this nation. Coming events cast their shadow, and this is the most critical year in our history. Therefore, I implore you, I'm begging you, because I love you, vote for Donald Trump to be our president. Please. Sometimes you can't conclude that you're speaking to the choir because you don't want to wake up the day after and wish you had done the right thing and made the right decision. Vote for the right people to Washington, D.C. Vote for Dave. Vote for the right people to Harrisburg, who represent American values, not just your values, American values. And allowing our kids, putting them in a state of sexual dysphoria is not an American value. We're the leaders of the world. If a poor country like Uganda can be preaching to the President of the United States what it means to respect the distinction between a man and a woman, it says a lot about how far we have fallen. Vote with your loved ones. Vote with your neighbors. Vote with your friends. Mail-in votes, for crying out loud. Changing times require adaptive winning strategies with the emphasis on winning. The goal is to vote, vote, vote. And I want to hear you repeat after me. Vote, vote, vote. And win, win, win. We can do it. Now, and let me paraphrase the last words of Lincoln in that famous Gettysburg Address. Why vote, 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 and win, win, win is important. So that these dead shall not have died in vain. That this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Brothers and sisters, let's not disappoint our ancestors. We gotta work together. Not just for us Republicans, no, for all Americans. We are because they are. I am because you are. So let's vote, vote, vote. Win, win, win. Win, win, win. I love you. Have a beautiful day.